And we're live. You're here with me, Michael Dean, the property funder. I'm here with someone also called Dean, albeit as their first name. Before we start talking to Dean and learning about why they're one of the foremost entrepreneurs in specialist finance, just want to thank you for joining us. First of all, if you're a returning visitor to the podcast, returning listener or viewer, thank you very much. I'd like you just to ask you, please, to like or subscribe, give us a 5-star review or 5-star rating, and give us a positive review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, iTunes, YouTube, and also on Spotify. If you can do that for us, it means that we can expand our reach, and so someone like Dean, more people can hear his story. Again, before we start talking to Dean, one more thing I wanted to do. A couple of times on the last couple of episodes, we've not had the opportunity to thank our sponsor, Avonmore Capital. I'm one of the co-founders of Avonmore Capital, so you'd think that would come naturally to me. But anyway, notwithstanding that, Avonmore Capital generously support the podcast by providing a lot of the support and infrastructure that we have today. And so as a consequence of that, just want to acknowledge Avonmore Capital for any of your bridging and development needs in England and Wales. So please get in touch. We're looking at loans between £250,000 all the way up to £15 million, bridge development, part complete, and refurbishment / conversion. And from now that's out of the way, we're going to start the conversation with Dean. Now, Dean, just tell us your full name and the name of your business and what your business does.
Thanks, Michael, for having me on. It's Dean Brown. I'm the MD and founder of Aureum Finance. It's basically a specialist finance brokerage based in Milton Keynes, but we act all over the country, across England, Wales, and Scotland mostly. Really set out as a specialist finance broker, predominantly in the property world, doing a huge amount of development finance, bridging finance, and equity raising for developers. Albeit about a year ago, just come up, we set up a business finance arm. So we're now helping companies across every sector with all sorts of other finance, such as asset finance, invoice finance, and unsecured and secured business loans. So it's been a busy year, let's put it that way, and certainly looking forward to having a chat with you.
Oh, no, that's great. Well, for our listeners and our viewers' benefit, Dean and I have known each other for quite a long time. Avonmore and Aureum Finance have done a lot of transactions together, so we have a long history of transactions, and Dean and I are also quite friendly as well. So men of a similar age, albeit with interest in different football teams. But Dean might prefer if I skip that topic today, I imagine. So as a recent, I wouldn't say a long-suffering Man United fan, but I think the suffering's only been more recent, hasn't it, for Man United fans? Those of us of the Arsenal persuasion have been suffering a little bit longer than you have. So welcome to the club. Anyway, so talking about asset finance, you actually mentioned to me before we went live something quite interesting, a project that you're looking at financing. You were something about anaerobic digester. What's an anaerobic digester for those of our listeners and viewers who are not initiated, and how did you end up with that client?
Well, anaerobic digestion is a form of renewable energy. So essentially dealing with all the cow crap that's out there and putting it into the machine, and effectively the methane gas that's created, it turns into a gas that you could utilise through the plant and machinery that they put in place, and then they feed that back into the grid as renewable energy. So you talk about wind turbines and obviously solar, they're obviously the most common and becoming more and more common, but anaerobic digestion has a lot more moving parts to it. It's a bit more complicated, so there's less of that sort of equipment that's out there, but it's becoming more and more common now. And the guys that we're dealing with, they're quite well established in that space and heavily backed by I think it's a French venture capitalist company, and they're looking to roll out another 20 of these anaerobic digestion plants all across the UK. So quite exciting.
Wow, and how did you acquire them as a client? Was it just through a referral, or was there a particular process to get in touch with them?
I suppose there are some perks going to watch Manchester United. It happened to be someone that came as a guest of one of my co-ticket holders. We just got chatting really, and I asked him what he did, what his business is, and he told me, well, I deal with, and he tried to put it in simple terms, and I said, oh, well, you mean anaerobic digestion? And he said, yeah, you're like one of the first people that I've ever met that knows what I do. And it's just by chance, really, that at my last lending firm that I was at, we actually invested in AD plant, and I know a bit about it. So we got chatting, and yeah, he's asked us to look at the senior debt on it. So just pure luck.
Yeah, okay, that's great. So it's quite helpful actually. So the sort of stars aligned because you had the benefit of a bit of knowledge and experience through a previous firm or previous employer, and then just by a chance meeting at Old Trafford, you had the opportunity to get to know someone and potentially help them out and got, if you can help them with 20 sites, that's going to be a very attractive proposition for you, I guess.
Yeah, it'd be amazing. It's a lot better than the football was that day, let's put it that way. So yeah, something good and positive to come out of that. And look, it's early days, but they've got a huge investment coming from this venture capital fund who brought half their business. And, if we can get in there and start helping them, then that could be great for us. It's something that I actually like because being a broker, it's something I've enjoyed most about being a broker is it's so varied. It could be anyone that you meet, any phone call that you get, it could be a total different requirement. So some days my phone rings and it's resi development, which is something we do all day, every day. Then another time it could be a care home, student, renewables, all sorts of stuff that we're working on. So that's probably one of the biggest pluses of coming to the dark side and becoming a broker, is that you have quite a varied day.
No, yeah, well, not having worked as a broker, I can't really comment on that too much, but although I don't lack for variety in my days anyway. No. That being said, it does sound like there's a lot going on, and you probably don't have 2 days that look the same. So that's probably a good selling point for potential employees when you're looking to hire, and which I guess we'll get onto at some point shortly. When you're placing the debt for the anaerobic digestion, is that what type of lenders are you placing that with? Are there presumably the pool of lenders that you would approach for residential development, and I as Avamore won't be a lender for anaerobic digestion, anaerobic digestion plant. Is the pool of lenders similar to the development finance, or is it completely different, or is there a little bit of overlap with certain names?
I'd say in the main it's quite different because unless you go into like a high street bank, most of the development lenders, as you know, they focus on that development space or maybe property investment like buy-to-let and things like that. They tend to get into the more esoteric stuff, but it would tend to be either a very large bank or it will be potentially a pension fund. So we'll be talking to a few of those. And then I will also be talking to some specialist funds that perhaps actually invest in AD or renewables. And then from that conversation, they may also lend into that space as well. So there's a few different avenues that will go down, and we'll see where we get to.
Yeah. And presumably, you've obviously got the benefit of some experience in AD, but when you're approaching a relatively new or less well-trodden sector, like funding, the development of AD assets, AD, just for everyone's benefit, is anaerobic digestion, but just reminding everyone again. What's your process for working out who's in the market? I mean, you said obviously you talk to people who are investing in the space, but and seeing if they will lend into it. But presumably, let's say it's not anaerobic digestion, it's something else. What's the process when you've got to learn a new line, like when you started doing the business finance, for example? What was it like to try and establish who was in the market and whose appetite was what? If you had to start from zero, what does that look like as a broker?
I think it's a case of picking up the phone and talking to your contacts, talking to professionals. Lawyers are a pretty good source of knowledge of who's out there funding because they're usually doing the legal work or something like that. But often it comes from your knowledge base and your own contact book. So having been a lender for so long and then subsequently now a broker for quite a while, we know a lot of the lenders and people within them, and it's just a case of picking up the phone, in my opinion. I'm never shy of delving into a new space because you learn a bit about it, but you also learn lenders that are in that space as well. And we did something similar on supported living a couple of years ago. We were approached by someone that's doing children's homes. It's not something that I'd funded myself previously as a lender or as a broker. So we picked up the phone and started talking to people. And now we've done numerous supported living, assisted living, things like that, because it's quite a specialist space. And I think that's just what you've got to do. You've got to go and learn about the space. You've got to learn about who's in that space. And then you've got to talk to them and learn about the funding. We had one a couple of years ago, which was a Sikh temple. It's a charity. So you've got to go to particular charitable banks and stuff like that. So again, learning about the congregation and how they collect their money and stuff like that. So what we do as a team is we'll talk to the client, we'll have quite a lengthy meeting and understand their business. And then once we've got that knowledge of their business, we'll then go and talk to lenders in that space and see where we get to. It can be time consuming, but it can be beneficial. At the end of the day, if you can help that one client, that's great. Obviously that's the target at first, but once you've done that first specialist thing and you shout about it on socials or podcasts or wherever it might be, people will get to know actually these guys do some pretty specialist stuff and they'll come to you. So that's really the challenge.
Do you find other lenders are lenders can be quite helpful in terms of making referrals? I mean, certainly from my perspective, if someone approaches me about a deal that I can't do, I'll typically try to refer them on to a lender that maybe I think is more active in that space. And then second arm to that question is, do you ever find other brokers willing to collaborate with you when you have a more esoteric requirement? Like the Sikh temple or like the supported living, for example.
Yeah, I think in the main, all the lenders that we talk to, we have a good relationship with. And I know if I picked up the phone to you and just asked you a question, even if it's not one for Aureum more, you'd probably try and point me in the right direction. It's much appreciated. And I think it's what goes around comes around. People remember that kind of approach, and then they'll come back to you for the stuff that does suit. We have very good relationships with lenders. So often, we speak to them about stuff and they'll refer us. And often we get referrals from banks where they can't place something. And they say, well, go and speak to Dean, or go and speak to the team at Aureum, and we'll be able to help you out. And then I think with, other brokers, that I think some brokers aren't that approachable, unfortunately, but we have a quite good relationship with quite a few brokers who actually we do collaborate with. Particularly when we're doing equity funding. We've done quite a lot of equity funding for property developers. Some brokers come to us and say, look, this client needs equity. I don't know who to go to. Could we work on it together? And we have done that on numerous occasions. We did it when COVID hit and we were doing CBILS loans for property developers refinancing their finished stock. And I had 2 or 3 brokers that came to me and said, look, it's just not their bag. They don't know what they're doing with it. So we collaborated and did that. So we're very open to collaboration with the right people. And I think, in the main, the market is generally quite helpful if you're known in that space and you've got a good relationship. I always treat it as healthy competition, friendly competition. And I can name quite a few other brokers that we get on really well with. So there can be a lot of collaboration in that space.
Yeah, I think Jordan McBride's episode from back in the summer, I think he mentioned that him and Joe have done. Joe, who works for you or works with you, have collaborated a few times on a couple of bits and pieces. So it's always good to hear good to hear and good to see. And certainly, the collaboration between lenders in the specialist finance arena and also lenders and brokers as well. It's not uncommon for brokers to pick up the phone to me, for example, and say, do you know who's active, or who would do this, or who would do that, knowing it's probably not a deal for us. And yeah, it comes quite naturally to us, because ultimately, it's a small market and you're always looking to help people out. Because yeah, like you said, what goes around comes around. In terms of your team more generally, do you ever get particularly for less experienced people, do you ever get a sort of a fear of picking up the phone? Especially when you've got sort of a fact find for one of these more esoteric requirements. Do you ever find people with a bit of a fear factor about picking up the phone and a bit less willing to put themselves out there, particularly with younger staff, where they're maybe a bit more comfortable on the WhatsApp or the chat, that kind of thing? Is that something you've seen or you experienced a lot recently?
Yeah, it makes me sound old, but I think it's a generational thing. And actually, we were talking about it in the office only last week, that too many in every sector just send emails and wait for a reply and things like that. And I implore all my team really to pick up the phone, talk to clients, talk to lenders, build a relationship, get to know them, understand which football team they support, things like that can be helpful sometimes. And I don't think there's enough of that these days. And that's why I've got, grey hair, and I'm a great believer in picking up the phone. But perhaps some of my mid-20s, staff here, they're not used to that. They send emails, they send WhatsApps and things like that. And I think that WhatsApp has become such a widely accepted form of communication now. It's actually often used more than email, but it's very dangerous in some respects, because there's no record really of that conversation, apart from if you've got messages and stuff like that. It could be edited after the effects and stuff like that. So I do think it's better to use emails when it needs to be noted, but by all means, I always think it's the best way to pick up the phone and have a chat.
And when it's interesting hearing you say that, because obviously we've had a number of your peers come on, and I asked the question just almost knowing the answer in advance, but it's always interesting to hear it as a sort of late millennial. I say late millennial, it's pretty early, very early millennial, being born in 81. Because I think if you're in my age, Dean, we sort of straddle between the two, don't we? Straddle between the sort of the older, sort of more old generation and the younger generation, and obviously we've got kids of a similar age now as well, and that's something even more interesting, some even more interesting challenges that will present themselves even further. Well, I'm hearing, I don't know if you see this from any of your kids or your kids' friends, but I'm hearing stories now where kids are together, they're playing video games together in their house on a play date, and then one kid says to the other, do you want to go home, and then actually do you want to go home and we'll play each other online, and they're almost more comfortable talking to each other on the game through a headset than in person, face to face. It's really wild when you hear these stories and you're like, wow, is that actually how it's going to work with them? And I certainly see it with my own, with my all three of my children now. They're all gaming whilst also chatting to their friends, not with strangers, thankfully, but chatting with their friends online. And you think, wow, how is that going to translate? How does that translate in a business setting? It's going to be very interesting to see how they develop, what communication skills they develop as a consequence of that. But just going back to reaching out to potential lenders, in that context, or potential investors, I suppose, because lenders are ultimately investing in projects, albeit through a slightly different mechanism. Certainly, when I have gone through fundraising exercises, if you're barking up the wrong tree, you can sometimes get a slightly unpleasant response. But in the main, if you're barking up the right tree, people tend to be incredibly welcoming and incredibly happy to help and try and do business. How do you get that? How do you get that message across to the team, so the people you work with, and how did you learn that yourself, so that you were able to be confident to pick up the phone to people that you might be able to get funds from?
I guess it goes back to my lending days. That when I was a lender, and even in the early days at Abbey National, we had to be on the phone all the time to clients, to customers, to brokers, and you just get into that habit of striking up conversations, being able to engage, being able to look at different points in the conversation you can pick up on and things like that. So that just comes from practice. And I think that the way that we do it as a team, we do sort of ask our team to attend the office. We're not one of the hybrid working businesses or 2 days a week in the office, things like that, which perhaps at Avonmore you probably had to embrace, given you're a London-based lender, and it's not everyone wants to come into the office every day. But I think in the main, our team want to come to the office because they actually pick up from other people in the office on the phone and stuff like that. So I do sort of advise my team to pick up the phone, have a conversation, because then other members, younger members in the team, maybe slightly more junior members, will actually hear that. They'll hear that conversation. Sometimes we'll ask the brokers to have other new brokers or the relationship managers join the calls or the teams meetings and just listen in and understand more about it, because I think it's really helpful for their growth and their knowledge to be able to do that. And I think that's probably one of the challenges that maybe the newer generation have got now, certainly since COVID, because when you are working remotely, 2, 3, 4 days a week, whatever it may be, they perhaps don't have that kind of support from their team, and as supportive as an employer can be in that space, and reaching out to their team and helping them and giving them training. In my opinion, there's nothing better than learning on the job, being involved in that team conversation, hearing what other people do or how they've handled the situation. So it'd be interesting to see how the next 10 years goes, where more and more people do work remotely, and see how their learning journey goes, and whether or not people actually still enjoy working remotely 3 or 4 days a week, or if people start to ask to come back into the office more often. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see.
I think the return to the office thing, and from an Avonmore perspective, I think the team's in the office now 4 days a week. So it's, we're very much almost back to normal, whatever that looks like. I think office working versus hybrid working, as a general rule, I think it's more effective in some industries than others. I think that in an industry, I think in a specialist finance business, whether that's a brokerage or whether it's a lender, I think it's more important as a broker, I would imagine, than as a lender. But I still think it's pretty damn important as a lender too. You want to have that sharing and dissemination of information. I guess is particularly as a broker, if you've got a case that's if you've got a particular case and you need a certain type of finance, like you say, it might be equity, might be senior, might be mezz, whatever. If someone's working on that kind of case and they've got someone next to them and they hear them on the phone going, I need this, I need that, your colleague might go, well, have you tried this person? You tried that person, or this firm or that firm? Because they might have experienced that, might have the intel that another colleague might not have, and they wouldn't have that conversation. They wouldn't be able to have that conversation. That wouldn't spark up if they were both sat at home making those phone calls from a home office or from the kitchen table, and being sat next to each other. That sharing of information is incredibly valuable, and so that's why I think it is essential. Within a lender, I think that the share, it's probably a slightly less essential, still important, but slightly less essential. Sometimes it can be just around, from a technical perspective, let's say an underwriter runs into a technical problem. Now they can schedule a Teams call with their head of department to talk through how to solve that, or the head of department could be sat next to them, and whilst they're encountering that, they can try and work through that in real time. So you've got efficiency, but you've also got a sales team, or originators, a sales team, you've got the treasury team, you've got the funding team. If everyone's sat less than 5 meters away from each other, something that could be a problem that could take weeks to resolve could be resolved in a matter of hours, because you've got people sat next to each other sharing that information. So you certainly got support from me. You certainly got support from me as far as that's concerned. I suppose the other thing is, as a broker and as a lender, occasionally you have to give people bad news, or news that is different to what they were hoping or expecting. How do you go about coaching your team, your staff, to sort of deliver bad news? And are there any do's and don'ts when you're doing it?
Yeah, so it's a difficult one because as a broker, you'd like to think you can help everyone, but it's just not true. And I think certainly something that we've talked about is being honest with people from the outset, being realistic with people from the outset, and setting the expectations. Because I think there's a danger that if you don't do that, then people automatically assume that you're going to get them funding, and it's not always possible. No matter how hard you try, someone might have too much of a blemish on their record, someone may not have a good enough deal. So we spend quite a bit of time at the outset looking at, let's say it's a development, we'll look at the profitability, the profit on cost after finance, we'll look at the contingencies they've got in there, we'll look at the build costs, and hopefully, it'll be realistic and things like that, to make sure that it's a deal that we think we can place, rather than spending all the time that we do writing up a presentation, sending it out to lenders, getting a lot of negative responses, sending it to more lenders and going round and round the houses, and I'm not really getting anywhere. Now, don't take that to be a negative. We're not negative about cases, we're just realistic. And by spending that time doing that upfront work, I think that does defray a lot of the negative conversations and defrays, hopefully the need for bad news. But, occasionally there are points when there's bad news. We've had it where people have pulled out at the last minute, whether that be a lender or an investor and things like that, mostly down to, market issues, like the Brexit vote that happened. I remember lenders pulled out carte blanche on numerous deals on that time. COVID, first lockdown, we had numerous deals, pulled out on us. So at the end of the day, it's about being empathetic to the client, and sort of assuring them that you're working hard to solve that issue. And if it really can't be solved, then being honest with them as to why it can't be solved, and then hopefully moving on from that. And sometimes clients have had to walk away from deals because it's just not good enough, or they can't get the funding for it. And ultimately, that's not our fault, but we do take a lot of that on board, because as a broker, you are the messenger between the funder and the client. And often it's shoot the messenger when bad news comes. So, we are very careful. I mean, do's and don'ts, I guess, do be realistic, do be honest, do communicate as well, even if you're not getting anywhere with something, keep talking to the clients. And that works both ways. That could be for lenders or brokers, keep communicating with the customer ultimately to assure them that you are trying everything you can. Ultimately, if you have to then go back and give them bad news, it's not a shock. It's been communicated throughout that there are hurdles and you can't get over them maybe. So I would say that's the key, to do those things. And I suppose the don'ts are, don't promise the earth. Don't promise that you'll definitely get them funding, or you'll give them funding if you're a lender, if you're really not sure about it. Don't try and do it too quickly as well. Sometimes we say to all of our team, you've got to make sure you get all the information and answer as many of the lenders' questions as possible at the outset, because I think that gives them more confidence in funding it, and ultimately, hopefully, you get better terms or quicker terms. So if you rush, and there is a tendency to do that if you've got a lot on, then you miss things, and then you just end up spending more time on it by answering numerous questions. So we do try to collate a proper pack of information, do a proper presentation for funders, and then hopefully do a great job for the client from there on.
Yeah, you effectively mitigate the need, or minimize the need to have difficult conversations with lenders by virtue of the upfront work that you do, which I think is a smart way to approach it. If we were to talk about property development and property developers particularly, and I know that we've got a lot of aspirant property developer listeners, or people who want to become property developers, and we've also had a good handful of developers come on the podcast as well. I said listeners, also viewers. So if you're on YouTube as well, thank you for keeping that going too. What do you think sets apart the successful developers from the developers who aren't so successful, especially in light of the fact that you've got a number of clients who repeat clients who are, you know, developing sometimes up to hundreds of units a year? You know, what the ones that are successful, why are they successful, and the ones that fail, why do they fail?
I think the successful ones are the ones that are willing to take a risk, but it's a calculated risk. And what I mean by that is that, yeah, I think every development site will usually have a challenge of sorts. It might be in the construction, could be in the ground, could be the placement of it and what's around it, you know, and saleability thereafter. So, you know, there's a challenge and there's you know, a risk, but is it a calculated risk, and is it something that they feel is justified and something they can get over? I think where developers go wrong is that there's almost like a desperation to find a site. They squeeze all their margins. They're too bullish on the GDV estimates. They squeeze down their build costs, which obviously has been quite disastrous the last sort of 18 months or so, you know, and they're doing that. And effectively, they're only doing that so they can try and win the site, pay more for it. And, you know, some of my clients say to us, you make your profit on the way into a deal, not on the way out of a deal. And effectively, what you pay for a site really dictates how much profit you're going to make. So if people overpay for the site by squeezing down their costs and then squeezing up the GDV to try and make them more competitive to win the site, then invariably they're the ones that encounter issues when something does go wrong, when one of those challenges hits them, then it costs them more to build, or perhaps the sales market, as we've seen last year, isn't as bullish. They're the ones that struggle, you know. And what happens invariably is that when you get into development, you're quite highly leveraged most of the time because you've only got a finite resource of equity. And if you're too highly leveraged and you've taken risks such as that, then you're going to encounter difficulties. And they tend to be the ones, in my opinion, that, you know, fall over. And that's the end of their development journey. Yeah, the more established developers are realistic with their costs. You know, they look at the sites in massive amounts of detail in terms of the saleability. And when it comes to selling those units, you know, they've made sure that there's not a sewage treatment plant nearby that smells on a summer's day when someone's coming to view the properties and things like that. You know, they've really done their DD. And they know that it's going to get there or thereabouts, you know, in terms of the sales. So I think, you know, you have to take a risk as a developer, but it should be a calculated risk.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that sounds like it. That makes a lot of sense. And in terms of, you know, in terms of the equity piece, you know, obviously you help developers get equity as well as debt. Can you just talk through the difference in approach that you have to take when you're approaching someone to provide equity for a developer compared to when you might be approaching someone about providing the senior debt? Presumably, it can be more challenging to get equity because it's a higher risk piece of capital. How do you go about presenting that client to an equity provider compared to a debt provider?
I think it is pretty similar in our approach in the sense that even when we're presenting it for lending, we do, you know, a presentation about the client, who they are, you know, where the scheme is, what it is, and so forth. But I think, you know, probably the main difference is, you know, really drilling down on the client's track record, because the deal is the deal, you know. But at the same time, a lot of our equity funders, it could be the best deal in the world, but if they don't believe in the developer, i.e. their JV partner in most cases, to be able to deliver that scheme on time, on budget, and sell it for a good profit, then they just won't do the deal because, in their opinion, you know, there's other deals out there. And, you know, certainly at the moment, equity providers are inundated with opportunities and they're really cherry picking. So we do try to drill down on the developer's track record and their approach to things and how good their team is in terms of nailing down the build costs and so forth, and making sure that they're absolutely correct, because that will give the equity provider confidence that their profit share is protected. Now, no disrespect to any senior lender, but they only really care that enough houses sell to repay their debt. Yeah, so if they're lending 60% of the GDP, they've only got to sell 6 houses out of 10 before they get the money back, in their opinion. Even if the sales figures aren't quite there or it costs a bit more, okay, it's 7 houses, but it's not all 10. Equity providers only share the profit, or their focus is really on 10 house sales and what they're getting after the bank. And then, like you said, that's the high risk element of it. So we have to really give them confidence that it's the right partner and it's the right developers that they're going into the deal with. And often equity providers, they want to do deal after deal with the same people, really. So it's about what's their pipeline, what else have they got coming up, what have they got in planning, things like that, to give them an idea of what's coming down the track after this deal. Because with lenders, again, they like to lend to repeat borrowers, don't get me wrong, but for equity providers, I feel like it's even more important for them because they don't want to keep reinventing the wheel. They're not a massive marketing machine going out there shouting about what they do. Typically, they're quite under the radar, and when we bring them opportunities, they like to know that we've underwritten it and looked at it properly before it goes to them. And that's why, a couple of our equity funders are exclusive to us, because they know my background as a lender, as an equity funder. They know that we look at things properly. They know that we're not just, trying around to try and get a deal through. We're actually looking at deals properly before it goes to them. And we look at, does it tick all the boxes for them? Do they only want to fund houses? Then they only want to do up to 10 houses at a time. We're not sending them 30 houses or 30 apartments, things like that. So we do look at it quite carefully and who we send it to and what they actually want as well.
Yeah, I mean, that all makes sense. And to be honest with you, knowing how you approach deals, I'm not surprised that you find yourself in that position. Because if I think with a sort of lens, or think with a equity funder hat on, and again, as someone who acquires commercial property assets with family equity or family capital, I'm extremely selective about the deals that I look at, because I have a particular type of deal that I want to buy as a commercial investor. And by the same token, I therefore need to be very selective about which agents I work with, because if I take deals from everyone, I'll be spending a lot of time running around looking at lots of deals that don't necessarily work for me, and I'm also going to have nothing's going to be pre-vetted, because if I'm accepting intros from every agent under the sun, by the same token, no one's ever going to take me seriously, because if they send me a deal that I've already seen 4 times, they're like, well, he's obviously too well covered. There's no point sending him any more deals, or actually making any effort with this person, because ultimately they're spread too thin. So I'm very particular, actually, that I'll only accept introductions from about four agents, of which probably only 1 or 2 will send deals to me with any degree of regularity. But it does mean, on the flip side, that when I want to pursue something, because they know that I'm serious, and because they know that I'm not accepting introductions from every Tom, Dick and Harry, I will get really good service from them as a consequence. So there's some really good interesting parallels between what you're doing with these equity providers and what I experience as, I suppose, a commercial investor operating in a similar way in a slightly different field. When you're obviously you're starting to be quite selective about the people you work with, and I suppose particularly the people on the equity side. What would you say are red flags for you when it comes to taking on new clients? Like what gets the alarm bells ringing as far as you're concerned?
We at the outset, we always ask for exclusivity, and if someone's not willing to give you exclusivity, then it's wasting our time, it's wasting other brokers' time. So we don't tend to get into that. We prefer to be exclusive, at least for a period of time, to give us the opportunity to really waste our time and resources, in actually trying to find a solution. We don't want that to be a waste of time. I think that we always ask a lot of questions at the outset. And if the answers are very forthcoming and very open, that is helpful. You know, we don't want someone that doesn't really treat us with trust or as part of their team. You know, we always say we are part of your team. We're trying to get funding for you. So tell us everything, you know, warts and all, and we'll deal with it accordingly. Because our approach to any sort of lending requirement is to talk to the lenders and tell them everything about it, but also justify why it's acceptable. So, you know, we want to understand all that. And then I guess, yeah, if they've had a fair amount of failed businesses in the past, there are reasons why some people run into difficulties, but if it's happening again and again and it's more recent, then part of me feels, how can we honestly recommend them to the lenders that we're talking to? Because they've got that sort of track record, then it's probably not something that they're going to stop anytime soon. But if it's, if I've got funding for people before who previously been bankrupt or they've had CVAs and stuff like that, but there's been justified reason for it. And things happen, you know, that's, as we said earlier, development particularly is a risky business. So we've had 2008, which was horrendous for any developer, let alone, you know, ones that are more established. So I do think that we do look at people's track record, we look at how they behave with us, and if we get, you know, quite a few red flags at the outset, then we just won't deal with them. So that's probably the best way to sanitize at that point.
Yeah, I guess, you know, you're the biggest service that you're offering really is your time, right? That's the one commodity you're able to give to give to clients, aside from maybe the benefit of your knowledge and some technological solutions as you sort of start to build them out. But ultimately, time is the number one resource that you're giving up when you're doing this work, and it's a very limited resource, as we all know. There's only so much of it, and we can't get it back. So I guess if you're dealing with someone that you don't think is credible, or you think is potentially untrustworthy, or is going to waste your time, then understandably, I could understand why you wouldn't want to take them on as a client. And because ultimately that's time you could be spent better looking after other clients as well. And I suppose the other side to it too, Dean, is the one around credibility, which is that brokers do need some degree of credibility with the lenders or funders that they work with. Now I think in the past 10 years, I think there's probably been lenders have had to be very forgiving of brokers' approaches. It's probably that brokers have had the whip hand, but there are certain brokers that have taken things too far, and they end up ending up on unofficial blacklists within a number of lenders, or at least I'm aware of that. So I suppose the other aspect is too making sure that you protect and retain your credibility with lenders, because ultimately, it's a selling point for you with a client that you have that credibility with a lender, where if something's on the margins, whether that's pricing, whether it's leverage, whether it's some other specific deal term, you're going to be more likely to be able to push that lender over the line because of your relationship with the lender, but also the credibility that you have. Whereas if you don't have any credibility with a lender, you're not going to be able to exercise any of that sort of negotiating leverage as a consequence.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, when I first became a broker about 8 years ago, I set up the intention of being one of the best brokers in the market, and I wanted us to do things in the right way. And I think that it's absolutely key to have that credibility. It's weird to think that we in the specialist broking world deal with multi-million-pound transactions and it's unregulated. So pretty much anyone can do it as a broker, which is shocking to say the least, really, because there are unfortunately some that don't know what they're doing and they don't give the clients the best service, and often aren't doing it in the best interest of the client. So we're very different to that. We want to give them the best service, and when I say them, I mean the clients, obviously. But we also want to give lenders the best chance of giving the best terms to the best clients. And I think the more that we work together as a partnership, lenders, brokers and clients, then the better that relationship will be and more you'll do together going forward. So I'm a great believer that we've got to keep our credibility high. We've got to give the best service to our clients, but we've also, got to treat lenders in the right way as well. And going back to your kind of bad news bit, when we get bad news given to us, we always have to handle it in the right way, in a professional manner with that lender. We might not always agree with their decision. We might try and combat that decision and see if we can come up with a solution. But if you can't, you've got to take it and you've got to go elsewhere and place it somewhere else and move on. I always say to my team, you can't throw your toys out the pram. You can't treat a lender in a bad way, a negative way, because next week you might need them again. So you've got to handle it well and work together going forward. And I think that does bode well for us, because there have been times when it's been on that edge, maybe deals haven't quite worked or whatever, and we've come up with a solution between us that's worked. And I can think of one in particular you and I sorted out, during COVID.
It's really funny. I was just thinking exactly that. Yeah, that we kind of got there, didn't we? It's I think what was interesting is that my experience there was I couldn't fob you off either. I couldn't get because of your experience as a lender. Your understanding of how lending works meant that you kept me very honest in that situation, but the good news is we found a solution for the client. We made it work. In an ideal world we wouldn't have had to have those conversations, but COVID, that initial period of COVID was new for everyone, wasn't it? And it took some working around. But yeah, I thought that was a good example, But more importantly, Dean, though, if we didn't hold you in such high regard, if our relationship with you didn't matter as much to us as it did, the outcome for the client might have ended up ended up different. Now, it's not to say that clients aren't treated equally or anything like that, or aren't treated equally fairly, but we're all human beings, and at the end of the day, you are going to probably, when things are difficult to do, when you don't have to do something, you're more inclined to do something that you're less comfortable doing for someone that you like and respect on the lending side than for someone that you don't have as much like and respect for. And so, to speak to your character and to speak to you as an individual, the esteem that we held you in meant that we had to find everything that we needed to do to find a way to make that deal work, when the rest of the market wouldn't have done it, to the extent that I put my own actual money into that deal, rather than institutional money into it. So because it was more difficult to do at that time. So yeah, I think it speaks volumes to that.
I do appreciate that, definitely.
Just taking a different attack, and then we can maybe just sort of drill into kind of how we got here, because it's sometimes nice to go on a bit of a meander and talk about themes rather than stories, but people like stories as well, so we can give people the story in the second half of the show. One of the things that you've done quite well or quite successfully recently is your work with relatively inexperienced developer clients. How do you approach selling newer developer clients to lenders? And if someone's listening to this podcast today or watching this podcast today, and they're looking to get into property development, what tips would you give them to help them on their journey?
Well, we don't mind helping newer developers at all. I think that, in my view, little acorns turn into something much bigger. And I think it's how you handle them that really can dictate whether or not they are successful sometimes. So we do quite a bit of upfront work with newer developers in terms of putting together their story, helping them put together their track record, because often it's not a development track record, but it's a property CV. It's about what they've done in property, what has been their employment and so forth. We help them a lot with the appraisal basis, and really drilling down on getting their numbers correct from the outset, making sure that they've got everything in there that they need to have in there in terms of the costs. So make sure they've got build warranties, insurances, works in there, so they really know what profitability of the scheme is. So we do a lot of that, and then it's really, for want of a better word, holding hands with them all the way through to make sure that it gets to where they need to be, because there is that inexperience. They've never really trodden that path before. They don't always know what to expect in the process. And we help them every step of the way. We review their valuation reports, we review their PMS reports with them, we go through all of that. And from a legal perspective, that's often a minefield. We go through the facility letters with them and point out the main things. And often they come to the table with a lawyer that they've used for their buy-to-lets and stuff like that. And I always say, don't use them. Find a lawyer that's got development track record, that knows how to deal with development lenders. It's a very different world. So we help them with their power team. We help them with architects, lawyers, structural engineers, all sorts of things, really. That's, we don't earn any money out of that. That's not the intention. It's about helping them to form a real solid team and a real solid track record to be able to deliver that project after we've got the funding, because we want it to be a success. We want them to complete that development, sell it out, move on to the next one. We want to be doing multiple deals with them, and any help we can give on that, we will do. So we do present at at a group, that's helping developers, and we talk to them about the finance, about the process and things like that. And we go into great detail on that side of things. So I think that's really important for developers that are getting into it, because too many people think it's too easy, and it's actually not. The funding is hard, getting the funding is hard, then actually doing the development is hard. So we try to give them all the tools that we can, and by doing so, I think that again sort of breeds loyalty, and they appreciate that we go above and beyond, and then they stick with us. And that's the intention, really, to grow a nice relationship that grows and grows. And I've got one client, the first deal I did for them was a little PD conversion into 4 flats. The most recent one we did was 79 flats. So they do grow, and that's one success story. But there's many more that we help. So the particular group that we helped with the mentoring and so forth. Last year we did 17 deals with them through different mentees that went through that, and they're people that are starting out on their journey. So there is probably sometimes more work in that than if you go to a client that's got an FD and they build 100 houses a year. They're a bit better set up. But I always take a view that those smaller guys are going to get to that one day. So, the work that we put in now will be beneficial in the future.
Yeah, I suppose the other thing is the firm with the FD is the FD's probably got multiple relationships with people just like yourself, or direct relationships with lenders as well. So, there's good business logic to trying to work with these people at an early stage. And frankly, Avonmore's made a lot of success from working with early stage developers, people who are early in their journey, and I guess with the intention that they'll be with us for as long as we're the best option for them, as long as we deliver the right things for them. I suppose one of the challenges with less experienced developers is fundamentally is that they tend to work on smaller schemes. They tend to have less equity or less cash to put into deals, which obviously has been important recently when with build cost inflation being what it's been. They tend to be, as you say, they tend to be worse advised. The lawyer is the uncle above a fried chicken shop. It's kind of not a serious comment, but we all know the type of lawyer that we're talking about. So as a consequence, they are not sufficiently experienced or qualified to handle the inquiries that come through from the lender's solicitor. So the flip side is when they're getting paid the same as a residential conveyance, the 750 quid or the £1,000, when they get that CPSEs or they will have to provide replies to inquiries, and they're getting paid the same for that as they are for for a buy to let or for the resi purchase. The development inquiry goes down the list of priorities because it's too hard for them to do, and it's not paying them enough to do it. And that's one of the biggest experiences that we've seen from why deals fall down and don't go anywhere. So as a consequence, making sure that they've got, I mean, you're smart in the sense that you've got, not only are you more likely to get the first deal, to get the second and third and fourth deal over the line, you're going to get the first deal over the line as well, which is, in my experience, often is where the difficulty lies, and developers end up getting frustrated because they're just not, they're not geared up to deal with proper development lenders in that environment, and to be able to engage in the right way. So yeah, I think it's great. It's great to see that you're doing it. I mean, if you were to sum up, if you were to say though, the one area where there's one bit of advice you were to give a relative newbie developer, in terms of their journey, of the things that you've seen over the years where you think you've seen things go wrong or go right, what's the number one bit of advice that you would give to them above all others?
Probably to get a good team. And when I say a team, I don't just mean the lawyer. That is probably the most fundamental part. But also, if you're not doing your own construction and you're using a contractor, get a good surveyor, quantity surveyor or something like that to work on your behalf to really nail down that contract, make sure everything is in there, make sure it's specified correctly. Because I've seen so many developers use third-party contractors and the costs have just spiraled because they haven't really nailed down all of the employer's requirements correctly, and they end up spending a lot more money than they originally budgeted, and spending more money means a lot less profit. So it can be a false economy not having a good team, not employing a good team, or try and get the cheapest team, because ultimately you will end up losing much more than that cost in due course, because you were either badly advised or you weren't advised at all. And I think that's the key for me, is to get a really good solid team around you.
Yeah, I mean, I can think actually of a mutual client of ours where the developer and the contractor had quite a big falling out when the project was actually quite advanced, and it put everyone in quite an awkward position, and it actually surprised me that it ended up that way. But I felt on balance it was something that the developer just needed to learn from, because they ultimately, if they'd spent the money on having a good QS or a good employer's agent to look after them and to go into bat with the contractor on, I think some of the issues that ended up sort of breaking down that relationship and putting the developer in a difficult position when they never should have been, could have been avoided much earlier on. It could have been nipped in the bud. Unfortunately, they were just put in a position in the end by the contractor, which fundamentally meant that they were over a barrel, and we as a lender, our number one priority was to get the thing finished, and that was that. And the developer probably ended up worse off as a result, but hopefully the learning lessons from that mean that they'll that next time they won't, they will be a bit more wary about being turned over by the contractor. So yeah, I guess we'll, like you said, the team is very important in that situation.
Yeah, I think the challenge comes, you see it often where a developer does a JV with a contractor, and it all starts off very rosy and it's a great relationship until it starts to go wrong, and then it becomes very contractual. And it's often, I've seen it before, developers walk into a room and they see one pendant light and they say, "Oh, I wanted 8 spotlights here," and they say, "Well, didn't price for that. That's not in the contract." And that's, the failing really is that kind of communication and setup at the outset. And ultimately, if it was all priced in at the start, the cost would have been much higher, and the deal either wouldn't have worked, or you have to negotiate a better price on the land. So this is what I was saying earlier, really, you've got to get your numbers right at the outset and pay the right price for the land. Otherwise, you're going to be up against it from day one. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. When a developer works with any contractor, I would always recommend getting a QS to opine on the numbers, opine on the documents, make sure there's a contract in place, make sure it's a sound contract, and you hope that it just sits in the drawer for the whole of the development and never comes out. But when it comes out, at least you've got something solid. So that's probably the biggest part that you focus on.
Yeah, and I guess if you're a developer or a landowner going to JV with a contractor, understanding that you put the build in, I put the land in, and we split the profits. it sounds like a nice idea in principle, but of course, you know, the contractors aren't always, you know, they don't. And I'm not speaking about any in particular situation here, but contractors in that situation, you're providing them with a bad incentive, because if you don't fix the costs, they're ultimately going to trying to inflate the build cost in that situation, leaving the profit to be split at the end, to be quite thin as far as the landowner is concerned, because the contractor will have attempted to take as much profit out during the build. So it's another one of the sort of JV pitfalls that we are aware of, and that that developers and landowners need to be conscious of before entering into JVs, and, you know, making sure that they structure them appropriately.
We sound like we're gunning for all contractors there, but we're honestly not. It's just certain occasions we've seen that happen. So
yeah, if you put the wrong incentive in front of anyone, you will see a disproportionate number of people leaning into a direction that isn't necessarily in all parties' interests. So it's just, you just need to make, because it's human nature. So it's true that you do need to just design contracts and contractual arrangements such that you're not providing skewed incentives for the parties that are engaged in it. Yeah. I wanted to sort of talk about your story, Dean, because we've obviously talked a lot about you know, business specific things, but let's talk about how you got here. You mentioned Abbey National. Obviously, I know about your time in Ingenious, and here we are at Aureum. Do you want to just talk us through how you got here, how we got to where we are now?
Yeah, I spent the first 10 years of my career working at Abbey National, and the good thing about that is a big corporate machine with lots of different departments gives you lots of opportunity as well. So I started out taking applications for unsecured loans on the telephone, and then went into a full-time role there as their youngest ever unsecured underwriter, basically opining on declined applications for credit cards, overdrafts and loans. And yeah, from there, I've always had a passion for property. When I was young, my favourite game was always Monopoly. So I wanted to get into property in some way. And I was offered the opportunity to go into the specialist underwriting team there on the property side. So I had to take almost a sidestep to go up, learned the ropes in the secured side, and ended up in the specialist mortgage service at Abbey, where we basically worked with a select number of brokers, a key intermediary team there. And we were basically underwriting deals which were the weird and wonderful stuff that, you know, none of the branches or business development units could actually deal with. So it was, you know, footballers, stockbroker on 100 grand basic and £2 million bonus. He wants to buy a £3 million house. He doesn't want to buy a £300,000 house. So, you know, we had to deal with the weird and wonderful, and that really gave me the opportunity to really delve into cases and underwrite them properly. So I really enjoyed that. Got into credit risk, starting to apply on policy. And then I was approached to go and join Close Brothers. It's my first job in the city, and started working in London full time then. Basically working on a fund management team. We basically did property, anything property with a tax angle. So we had ground vehicles, EZT funds, and I worked on an inheritance tax vehicle, which basically did joint ventures with property developers. So I was really putting my passion into play, and basically providing people 100% funding in the good old days of sort of 2006, 2007. In 08, the world ended, and lots of our development clients handed back the keys, including one that went into a mental home because the pressure was so bad, unfortunately. And yeah, I learned a huge amount in the next 2 or 3 years because we basically became property developers overnight. We had to deal with all sorts of problems, you know, anything from The foundations have just been poured on one site through to dealing with the sales or trying to sell things in a terrible market and dealing with the agents and designing brochures and marketing and all sorts of things. So I became a property developer overnight and did a huge amount there and learned so much. So that was really, really good for my career. We were brought out of there by a company called Aureum Capital. We launched Alpha Property Lending because the investors didn't want to do 100% finance anymore. So we then basically launched a lender and did what was probably the first, if not one of the first, stretch senior offerings. Doesn't sound very stretched now. We were offering 65% of GDV or 80% of cost. So in 09, no one else was really doing that. And yeah, that went really well. And then I was approached by Ingenious. They'd seen what I'd done at Alpha and Close Brothers before. They had an inheritance tax vehicle. They were doing quite a bit of renewable energy, going back to what we saw talk about with AD and wind turbines and so forth. And they wanted to do property. So I went in there with a blank piece of paper and created a stretch senior development finance lender doing 75% of GDV or 90% of cost. And yeah, it was basically myself and two assistants. And we got the book to about 120 million in 2 years, just doing sort of 1 to 5 million loan sizes to start with. And then I was approached by a friend of mine who I'd worked with previously, who asked me to help him set up a corporate finance brokerage. And being a bit snobby, I turned it down first, so I'm not sure I want to be a broker. But after about 5 pints, he convinced me it was the right thing to do. And we set up a brokerage together under the umbrella of another mortgage broker and ran that for a couple of years. My focus was development and equity raising for developers, because that's a bit I enjoyed and also a bit I'd got most experience in. And then I just felt like it was time to row my own boat, to be honest. I had set up businesses for other people in terms of lenders and subsequently a brokerage. And I set up Aureum just shy of 6 years ago. We're now a team of 21. And yeah, it's been an amazing experience. Been an interesting market to work through with COVID and other things, but we're growing nicely and we're expanding our offering. As I touched on, we now do business finance, so that's a very new world to me. But it's been nice. I like the challenge and I like the interesting part of learning about new parts of the business and growing parts of business. And I suppose there's a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit in me that's the bit that I really enjoy.
I mean, growth to 21 already is remarkable. I mean, there's plenty of your peers that are, 15, 16, 17, 18, 20 years old who don't have that many people. And presumably, if you've got a team of 21, you're doing a significant amount of volume to be able to sustain that number of maths that you have to feed, across the wider team. Because I know that not everyone's going to be a broker or a frontline broker. A lot of people are going to be support or admin or assistants, junior brokers or whatever. So not everyone's going to be doing the do at the coalface. So to be able to keep that side of the team going is quite something. And in terms of the team, are they predominantly directly employed, or is there are the number of them self-employed within the team? What's your model?
On the brokerage side, we offer both options, and it really comes down to our view, but also more importantly, the broker's requirements and what they want. So we've got a real mix, probably about half and half, to be honest. Who are employed and self-employed, and we treat self-employed very much as part of the team. They're not left out on the limb. They come to all of our events, Christmas parties, etc., because we want them to fly the flag of Aureum and feel like they're part of the team. So we include them in everything, really. And I think that a lot of the self-employed brokers that have joined us, they've just been so refreshed by that approach. And I'm not, saying that no one else does that, but I was surprised to hear how some brokerages treat self-employed brokers. There's no support there. They charge them like monthly retainers and things like that. Maybe we're a bit naive. We don't do that. We only take on people that we believe in. We give them all the support, and hopefully they succeed. And that's what we want. Then on the employed side, quite a few of our employed brokers have grown from being relationship managers in the support function. And we've given them progression. We've given them all the training, the knowledge, and they're grown into brokers. And although they're, more junior in their experience, in fact, actually, they know quite a bit more about development finance than most of the brokers that we get shown CVs for from recruitment agents, because it is quite a specialist area, and takes a certain type of people to work on that, and certain level of knowledge, in my opinion. So it's been good to grow from within and give them that opportunity as well.
I guess it also helps having family, for at least for the most part of the business's existence, having family as well as part of the team to help you.
She's moved on now to be a business development company, and I think that's really her specialism. And she was an integral part of helping set up the business from day one. It was just myself and Elise in the office on our own, and often for that early few months, I was out on the road, banging the drum about Aureum, trying to drum up a bit of business and actually get those deals in. So she did a lot by speaking to me remotely, but. Yeah, we've got others in the team. Natasha's been here 4 years, Kieran over 3 years, and we've grown a lot in the last couple of years, to be honest. And a lot of that growth has been from the business finance side. So we've got 8 brokers on the business finance. We've got 7 brokers on the property side. So we want to keep growing both of them now.
Yeah, and in terms of the model going forwards, certainly from the conversation I've had with a number of brokers privately, and then also in the podcast, and we've had James McGregor of P10 Financial on just before Christmas, and we were talking, and that episode was released a couple of weeks ago, in early January, and he was saying that he wants to now move to an almost exclusively directly employed model, because he just thinks there's so many more benefits from being structured in that way. Are you going to keep your kind of open mind about employed versus self-employed, or is there a preferred bias in terms of which direction you might go in?
No, I think we carry on as we are. I don't really see that it's a negative to have self-employed people. I guess, you have to be selective about who you take on as self-employed, though. That's probably our key focus. Is we've been approached by people that want to join us, and we've turned some of them down, and that's because they've got to fit in with the team. They've got to fit in with the ethos of the company. They are still putting your business card into the hands of people, so they've got to represent you in the right way. And we only want the right people. It's not always easy to do, whether you're employing someone or you're taking on self-employed, to be honest. So often you only meet people for a couple of hours during the interview stage. So I think there's challenges on both sides, really, pros and cons to both sides. But I think we'll carry on as we are. And there'll be some people out there that we really want to meet this year who are probably self-employed, one-man, one-woman bands, that they could do that infrastructure, they could do that support to help them with the growth of their business. And they can come under our brand and our umbrella, and we'll give them all of that support. And it frees them up to go and do more origination, find more deals, and do more business and have more money. So, there's probably the blinkered view that, I don't want to give away a share of my commission, or there's the view, well, actually, if I give away a small share of my commission and take on all that infrastructure, then I can do a lot more business. So it takes the open-mindedness on the other side as well.
Presumably there's more if you're a specialist in, say, business finance, if your clients have got property needs that you can't serve as well, or vice versa, there's also additional earning opportunities that come from being part of a wider network. So I see that logic. What's the future for Aureum, Dean? What are we 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What's Aureum doing? What are your aspirations?
Aspirations would be to continue growing the team. I don't want to be a massive team, but I do want to continue growing the business. More brokers to, help us in that journey. But also, I'd like to help people out by setting up an equity fund of some sort, equity or mezzanine fund, because we see a lot of deals come through us where we can get in the senior debt pretty easily, but actually they could do that bit more, and that would help the growth of their business. And given my experience in the equity funding space, or the higher leverage space, higher risk space, I think we have the wherewithal to be able to do that sort of stuff. So that's probably my plan, to try and set up an equity funding space that we can actually call upon directly rather than going out to our pool of investors. And I say rather than, I mean, we still use all of those parties and we still work with everyone, of course, but to be able to fill the funding gap for people in-house would be a great advantage.
And in terms of, in terms of M&A activity within the brokerage sector, we've seen a number of transactions over the last couple of years. I suppose looking at, say, Mantra, looking at SPF as the sort of the standout examples. Are you looking at, would you consider acquiring any businesses through kind of to offer you greater vertical integration, whether that be on the insurance side, or say in the example of P10, where they actually have an accountancy and tax division and now an estate agency division, or would you be open or interested in going in the other direction, where maybe becoming vertically integrated into a larger business or a different business and effectively being acquired? Are these things that you think about, you'd be open to?
I think any broker, their biggest challenge is what's the exit plan, and you've got to look at how much your company can be worth in years to come. And it's very hard to increase the multiples on a standard brokerage because really the value is in the people in the business. So, people don't pay massive multiples on their earnings because the people in the business could all walk out after that. So you have to have value in your business. And I guess that's where SPF in particular have done a great job, because they've got a huge amount of insurance going through their business and ultimately acquired by an insurance company. So that's obviously a sensible way. So we do look at ways to add value to our business. It's something I started looking at probably last year, and I'd be open to different options really. Luckily, I've got a bit of time on my side to still work on that sort of strategy and to think about what the long-term exit is. But it's something that we've already started giving some thought to. So yeah, watch the space, and hopefully we'll be announcing some things in due course.
Okay, well, we're
maybe save that for the next podcast.
We'll save that for the next one. You're definitely coming back on, Dean. Don't worry, we're going to have you back one way or the other. Cool. And then I guess we're starting the wind down now. Outside of work, we've obviously talked about your fondness for Man United. What other things are you doing that's sort of keeping you sort of on a level playing field and making sure that you're not all work and no play?
Yeah, you'll know this better than I, but it is a challenge, isn't it? Because you do get so engrossed in your business, and you have to separate some time for yourself and your family. Otherwise, you'd go stir crazy, in my opinion, or burn out. So, yeah, it's something that I try to get to the gym as much as I can, but often have to stop myself from replying to emails and answering the phone while I'm there, sitting on the machines. Got my family, got my children, so I like to take them out and do some stuff with them, walking, or my youngest likes swimming and stuff like that. So try to keep them as entertained as possible. And then really, football is my passion. Unfortunately for some, I've got a season ticket at Man U, and that takes a whole day out of the diary, being a Southern Bank, as they say. So there's not a huge amount of time to do everything, but I want to do more travelling. Over the next couple of years, my wife and I, or the family, be able to spend more time going to other countries and seeing more of the world, really. So I've kind of said to myself, we've grown the business quite a bit. We're doing okay. We could do better in certain things. I'm always looking at how we can do better, but I've also got to do better from a social aspect as well, and try to get some travel time in there. That's been my plan for this year.
Yeah, I would second that as well. We've got to the end of January and I still haven't booked the summer holiday yet, so starting to feel that pressure. Need to get something booked sooner or later. But anyway, and then I guess in terms of mentors or big influences in your life and your career, have there been any particular people that stand out? I mean, a lot of people say their parents, but But including your parents, are there any people that have been big influences in your career or in your life that, you know, you look back on and that you wouldn't be the person you are today without them?
I think when I was at Abbey National, there's a lady there who ended up being my boss. She was very supportive. She told me where I was going wrong in my younger days, and it put me on the right path. So, you know, big thanks to her. But then I guess throughout the latter part of my career, I had you know, a gentleman that I worked with at Abbey National, then Close Brothers and Alpha. And when I went off and set up Ingenious, he set up a mezzanine lender, and then we got back together to set up our brokerage. And we, yeah, he's a little bit older than me, not hugely older, but we worked really well together. And not so much a mentor, but someone that we could work well together and tap into each other's knowledge and stuff like that. So he's definitely a big player in how my career has gone and kind of the direction it's ended up in. So yeah, you know, I would say outside of that though, you know, probably a couple of my really key clients, you know, we talk about business generally, you know, they've formed businesses, and you know, one in particular has got all sorts of businesses, you know, that he's a shareholder in, great experience. So it's great just to chat to him about his experiences, how he's seen things, and you know, some of the stuff that he's told me, I think actually that does ring true. So yeah, I always look at what other people with knowledge and experience can bring to the table, and you know, I'm thankful that those guys were in my life, to be honest, to help.
No, that's great. There's been a lot of guests that we've had recently on the podcast who either don't drink anymore or taking steps to along that path to end sort of drinking within their lives. And where do you stand on sort of alcohol and the industry, or generally in your own life? I know we've enjoyed a pint or two, and I certainly had a glass of wine at Mipham back in March. But you know, do you have any thoughts on that? Any plans to sort of cut back or go teetotal, or are you quite comfortable with sort of how your relationship is with the demon drink?
I think my wife would love it if I went teetotal, obviously. So that's the wrong answer. But the wrong answer is that, you know, I do still like to, you know, have a few beers now and then, and you know, go out with clients for lunch or whatever it might be, and have a glass of wine and chat. But I think it's in moderation these days. You know, I don't think you need to go crazy. And I think certainly in a professional environment, you know, Mipham for me this year versus Mipham when I started going 16 years ago, a very different Mipham now. You know, when you first go, you get overexcited and you go to every drinks party that you can and so forth. Now, maybe just because I'm getting old, you know, I like to space it out. I like to have time to check my emails. I like to, you know, spend a bit of quality time with clients rather than rushing from meeting to meeting. And I probably don't drink anywhere near as much as I used to. You know, so I think that it's in moderation. You've got, you know, in professional circles, you've got to be, you know, careful about how you represent yourself and your company. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the demon drink, but I think it's where people get a bit too excited and go overboard. That's when they have the regrets the next day. So I'm thankful I don't really have that too often now.
No, quite. But yeah, yeah. We were well behaved at Mipham, I might add. So we won't comment on some others that we know a little bit well. Okay, well, and final question from me: if you were going to give your younger self some feedback, some self-talk, maybe your teenage self, and we didn't talk about your sort of the teenage years too much, but if you're going to give your teenage self some self-talk, some advice, what would you say to yourself and why?
I probably would have read more and educate myself more. And I don't mean that in the sense of qualifications, because I've got quite far in life without too many qualifications. I didn't go to university. I went to the University of Life, as I always tell my team. And I think I've learned a huge amount through my experience. But actually, I think these days, you know, education is even more on tap. You know, podcasts, Audible, things that you can listen to in the car instead of listening to the radio. You know, those songs on repeat. So if I went back 20 years, I'd probably do more of that, more education, more reading books and stuff like that, to really understand different people's perspectives. Because, yeah, we all think we're doing the right thing, but actually you might read one thing in the book, or you might hear one thing on the podcast, and you think, actually, that resonates with me. And yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, well, I guess it's that lifelong learning, isn't it? And just continue to educate yourself, and things will work out for you. Well, anyway, I think a lot of the things that you're doing, Dean, or you have done in your, I say long and varied career. You're not that old, but it's still been quite the career so far. You're obviously going in the right direction. You've built a fantastic business, which we obviously have a very strong working relationship between our two firms, which I hope will continue long into the future. And obviously delighted by the success of your business finance division as well. So very much congratulations on that. Dean, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. Now, before you go, if anyone wants to reach out to you, what's the best way of someone getting hold of you? Is it LinkedIn? Is it through email? How would you like people to get in touch with you after the podcast?
Yeah, thank you for having me on here. First of all, I would say that. And if someone wants to reach out, I'm always available on LinkedIn, or they can contact the office, or go onto our website, which is aureumfinance.co.uk.
All right, and well, for those of you who are crazy enough to want to get in touch with me, or would like to block me on social media, I'm at Property Funder. So property_funder, I might add, at property_funder on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So and Threads. Not that I've used Threads more than twice. Thanks, Mr. Zuckerberg. So that's been that. But listen, I've been Michael Dean. I'm Property Funder. Thanks to Dean Brown for joining us today. Dean is the founder and managing director of Aureum Finance. Dean, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Cheers, Michael.